happy Friday, everybody. Hope you're having a good week and looking forward to having some fun this weekend. And don't forget today's Friday, wear a red shirt to remember everyone deployed, RED, remember everyone deployed, in honor of our first responders and our military personnel, wherever they may be deployed, whether at home or a sea. Well, some would be a sea, I guess, in the Navy and abroad. So do that on behalf of them. We enjoy our freedom because of the sacrifices they make on our behalf. Alrighty, our shout out this week goes to J&M Exploration. And if you haven't checked them out, highly recommend you do. They explore old abandoned places, some amazing hotels that they've been through, old amusement parks, historic sites. Just absolutely fascinating to watch. And you'll be raising your eyebrows going like, really? People just walked away from this and left it like, I've been flabbergasted at some of the places they've done explorations of. And it looks almost like one day everybody in the place just decided to go for a walk and never came back. But check out J&M Explorations. All right. Ready for Chapter 4? That's good, because it's story time. As there were 4 of us, and only 3 seats in the plane, Joe, Dave, and I took it in turn to play housewife, while the others went mapping. It was not an easy job, for there was plenty to be done to keep the camp habitable. While cleaning up and preparing meals, I was able to time all operations exactly by tuning into the aircraft radio frequency and listening for the check calls from CLE, Charlie Lima Echo, the call sign of our Cessna. By mid-afternoon, I had all work well in hand and was able to drive over to the homestead to get mail and also pick up supplies of meat and bread. I was welcomed in a fashion by an old gentleman who was watering a flower bed beside the house. When I spoke to him, he absent-mindedly turned around, pointing his hose directly at me. Slowly did his mind work that it took him several seconds to realize he was soaking me with water. The sun seemed to get hotter every day. When the thermometer finally touched 116 Fahrenheit inside the camp shed, I found a 44-gallon petrol tank that had been cut in half. I cleaned it and fixed it in a hole in the ground as a bath. But I only used it once. The sides were cut rather roughly. I returned from my bath in agony. No one seemed very sympathetic, but perhaps there is something funny about a jagged cut where I had mine. I had to stand to eat my supper. That was the last day of flying. The hottest weather was rapidly approaching, and the parched land sent up heavier clouds of dust every morning, making aerial photography useless. We waited 3 days in hope of a change, but on the 4th day, Dave took one look across the river, then came bustling back to camp. "All right, everybody, pack up! We're wasting our time. We'd better get back to the Ellis. We don't want to be here when the monsoons come, because we'll end up stuck in Victoria River Downs." I packed willingly. Even though we'd only been in Victoria Downs a short while, I had begun to understand the limitations of life on a station homestead. Beyond work and a little shooting, there was hardly any form of recreation. No wonder the cockies who drove to the races at Top Springs had spent the night whipping it up. Dave and I stood by the Land Rover, watching the plane until it was airborne. Then we started our bumpy journey back along the route we had used only a week or 2 before. After a few hours driving, with my eyes and nose full of dust and grit, I thought of Damien and Joe, sitting by now in a cool bar in Ellis Springs Hotel, each with a tall glass of something ice cold. "Roll on, Top Springs," I said early in the afternoon. "Isn't there anywhere near where we could get a cold drink? Is there nothing alive along this road?" "Nothing but scrub bulls," muttered Dave. "What kind of bulls?" "Scrub bulls, they call 'em. Tough old brutes. They leave the herd and wander on their own. If you ever meet up with one and you're on foot, then you better find a tree to climb or start writing out your will." "They're fierce?" "Yes, and clever. Clever enough to miss being caught in the annual muster. They'll even chase a man on horseback. Why, a stockman was gored by one only a few weeks ago. The flying doctor had to go out from the Ellis and bring him back to the hospital." After that, I kept a wary eye open for anything that moved. If a bull would charge a rider on a horse, then what would stop it from jumping into the Land Rover and sitting down between us on the driving seat? We reached the main road at Newcastle Waters at 9 the following evening. We heard the noise from the hotel long before we reached it. Every room was taken, so we had to camp nearby, alongside a bunch of hooligans who sang drunkenly for half the night. Then, just as I finally fell asleep, I felt the fierce patter of rain on my sleeping bag. Dave jumped up beside me. "Quick, Robin! Here she comes! Into our car, fast as you can!" Within a few seconds, the rain was teeming down, twice as heavily as I had ever seen it fall in England. The dusty ground immediately became covered with deep puddles. There were angry shouts from the camp next to ours, where the drunks had failed to wake up until it was too late to protect themselves. We sat in the cab of the Land Rover, unable to hear ourselves speak above the din of the rain on the roof. "Wait for a lull!" Dave yelled. "Then we'll nip into the hotel." When it finally broke enough that we could cross to the hotel, it looked as though everyone in Newcastle Waters had had the same idea. The bar was packed as if it was New Year's Eve, but at least it was dry. Next morning, the sun was shining from time to time, but as we drove south to Ellis Springs, there were occasional rain squalls warning us of what was to come. We were both thankful to be on the solid road. At least if a heavy rainstorm burst, we would not find ourselves bogged down to the axles in mud and forced to drag the Land Rover out with ropes and a winch. Our hotel was on the outskirts of Ellis Springs, again overlooking a riverbed. I remembered it was bone dry when we were there before, just a broad, shallow channel in the sand, with a few gum trees dotted about in it and on the banks. Now, though, we could not see it in the darkness. We could hear the sound of running water. The man who owned the hotel pushed his way through the crowd in the bar and joined us at the window. "She's a-comin'," he said ominously. In my ignorance, I said, "Well, you'll be glad to see a drop of water for a change." His eyes bulged. He pointed a shaking finger at the window. "Drop of water? Last time the River Todd went crazy, it took an 8-ton truck downstream with it. One minute the driver was parked and boiling up his tea in a billy, then when he looked around, he hadn't got no truck no more. It was a half-mile downstream." Any idea I may have had that he was exaggerating was forgotten when dawn came. Moving faster than a walking pace, red, dirty water was spreading out across the dry sand, bubbling and foaming, spreading out sideways until the river was 90 feet wide. Its depth in the middle I could only judge by the trees which stuck up from the water, with their leaves trailing in it. The wider and deeper the water, the faster the flow. As we ate our breakfast, it was racing past, ripping boulders out of the banks, carrying with it broken timber and huge mats of leaves. The hotel proprietor looked westward into the rain. He rubbed his hands with satisfaction. "She'll come no faster than she is now, but I reckon there's more rain to keep her going." He grinned. "You'll not be crossing that in your car." Dave laughed out loud. "You old money grabber, I suppose it's kind of a special bonus for you to keep the hotel fill up. How many days?" "2, enthusiastically the hotel proprietor added. "Maybe 3. Who knows?" The odd thing about the Todd River, as Dave showed me on the map, is that it flowed nowhere. Racing along its broad bed, the water simply spreads out into the desert, which sucks it up greedily and then produces a crop of gidgee bushes. When the last drop has drained away, once again the desert is bone dry until the next rainfall, probably a year away. Though the level was down sufficiently for cars to get across within 48 hours, we did not leave. The hotel's proprietor's guess that we were in a hurry to be on our way was far off the mark, for we had no intention of crossing the river and heading eastwards. We stayed 3 days, partly because after driving the long grueling journey to and from VRD, the Land Rover needed some minor repairs, and also because we needed a rest after the overpowering heat of the north. We made the most of our 3 days. We had timed our return very well indeed, because 2 other mapping teams arrived on the same day. One of these had been out west near Tanami. This is close to the border of Western Australia. According to their gloomy account, it is the worst land in the world, so bad it cannot even support an occasional cattle station. It made me wonder again what attracted anybody to this job, once the novelty had worn off. I looked across at Dave, who was cupping a glass of cold beer in his hands and staring at the ceiling. There had still been no answer to that question, yet there must be one. A dull-witted man might be content out here without a reason, but a dull-witted man would be incapable of doing Dave's job. Outside, sand stretched away, with nothing in the distance except more sand. It was a mystery. That's the end of Chapter 4. Hope you enjoyed it. And next week we'll be reading Chapter 5, The Aborigine Settlement. So we'll get to that next week. And it'll be interesting to learn a little more about Australia's Aborigines. Alrighty. Well, you know what they say. A spoonful of medicine helps the sugar. No, that's not right. How's it go? Well, anyway, we've just had the sweet, so now it's time for the sour, if you will. You ready for the groaner? Alrighty. Well, today's groaner. A young private in the military is awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. And of course, this makes quite a bit of news. And in his hometown, when he went on leave, the local reporter from the newspaper had to get a story. I mean, you know, local boy makes good. So he cornered the young fellow one day and says, "Can you tell me, what did you do to deserve the Distinguished Service Cross?" "Oh, weren't nothing really. I just saved the lives of every man in my battalion." "Really? Wow, that must be quite a story. What did you do?" "Well, just shot the cook." There you go. Alrighty, folks, you have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.